Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Alex Gray is an old friend. He was the chief of staff on the National Security Council in President Trump's first term, working with Ambassador Robert O'Brien. He's now the CEO of American Global Strategies. He's authored a fantastic new article in Foreign Policy on President-elect Trump's plan for the hemisphere. Welcome, Alex. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Hugh.
Would you explain to people what Greenland and Panama are all about? I like to say a man, a plan, Panama, a canal, Trump, or whatever that is. What is going on down there? What is the message he's sending?
Yeah, I think he's sending a message that we're going back to what used to be called hemispheric defense, this concept that the outer boundaries of the hemisphere, from the Aleutian Islands to Greenland, from the North Pole to the South Pole, and everything in between, that is what is our predominant defense interest. And I had someone say to me today, well, you're talking about isolationism. This is the same thing Charles Lindbergh said. I said, well, no. What this is about is because we face very real threats in our hemisphere from great power adversaries like China and like Russia. And President Trump is going back to core principles and saying Greenland, the Panama Canal, these all, whether it's the Mexican drug cartels, it's what's going on in the Caribbean and in South America, where the Chinese are up to their eyes in Belt and Road, and even military exercises in Brazil. There's a very real threat in the hemisphere, and the president's trying to get a handle on how to protect the hemisphere in our core national interests, not retreating from the world, but prioritizing what are our core interests. And I think you have to see Greenland and Panama as part of that larger discussion.
And millions of people are driving home right now, and they can't find Greenland on a map because, geography is a long time ago in their background. Why do we care about Greenland?
We care about Greenland for the same reason Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State, William Seward, cared about it, and the same reason Harry Truman tried to buy it in the 1940s. We care about it because it is so close to the United States. It is the furthest extent of our hemisphere. We care about it for the same reason that Ronald Reagan cared about it in the Cold War, because of the GI-UK gap, the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, that the Soviet submarines would come down from Murmansk. They'd come down through the gap and threaten the east coast of the United States. And we care about it not just for those strategic and geographic reasons and the potential threat that an adversary who controlled Greenland could pose to our homeland. We also care about it because it has extraordinary abundance of critical minerals that the Chinese and the Russians are already looking for ways to exploit. They're not going to look out for the sovereignty and for the independence and the environmental concerns of the Greenlanders. Only the United States has a track record of caring about those things when we go and we do mining and we do extraction. So I think this is a tremendous opportunity, not only economic security, but national security, to find a way to bring Greenland closer to the United States.
Now, Alex, in 2014, the Scots demanded and received an opportunity to vote on whether or not they would secede from the United Kingdom and be independent people. They did finally hold that referendum, and 55% said, no, we want to be UKers. Has anyone discussed letting the people who live on Greenland vote on the issue?
Well, you've seen over the last 15 years, Greenland has gotten increasing autonomy from Denmark. I think it's a real worthwhile question to try and pose to the Greenlanders. What is it that they want to achieve for themselves? Where do they see themselves going? And we have sort of an answer to that, Hugh. In their national security strategy, they say that around 2033 or so, they would like to be independent of Denmark. And everything they've done for the last several decades has been moving in the direction of independence, increased self-government, and increased autonomy. I think it's a worthwhile question to ask, okay, once they have independence, and we should take them at their word that that's where they're headed, what's the arrangement for making sure that the second least densely populated place on Earth after Antarctica is able to uphold its sovereignty? I don't think, history shows us that this is exactly the type of developing, lightly populated place where China is adroit at exploiting and undermining the sovereignty. We have to have a plan. I put it this way. When they get independence, and we should take them at their word that they want it, who's going to be there to greet them? Washington, Beijing, or Moscow? That's
Well
really the
said.
question facing President Trump and the United States.
Last question. It's kind of out of left field, Alex. I know that you and Ambassador O'Brien were big proponents of increasing the Coast Guard's fleet, specifically of icebreakers. Can we buy them under the Jones Act from people in Europe? My friend Captain Jerry Hendricks tells me they build them in Europe and we can buy them off the shelf. Can we do that? Should we do that?
It's a really tough question, Hugh. There are some Buy America provisions, whether Jones Act and some procurement provisions that do make it a little challenging, and there will be some pushback on it. I think there are creative solutions we can do to get around some of these things. We talked about leasing icebreakers that were made in Finland. That was a big topic at the end of the Trump administration. The bottom line is, and particularly with the Trudeau government that has basically made the Arctic more vulnerable by refusing to arm their own icebreakers for a decade now, the Arctic is extraordinarily vulnerable. And we have to figure out a solution. This is something I know Congressman Waltz, the new National Security Advisor, is very passionate about. We have to find a way to get the icebreaker thing solved immediately because the Chinese and Russians are expanding their fleets at scale, and they are up there and they are ready to exploit our weakness.
What does extremely vulnerable mean, Alex? We have about a minute. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at where we are in the Arctic, whether it's the Faroe Islands, this island called Svalbard, Greenland, Iceland, northern Canada, the Chinese and the Russians are beginning to send their fleets of icebreakers, beginning to send ostensibly private entities that are related to the government in both instances into these vulnerable, isolated islands with the goal of establishing strategic beachheads and exploiting the economic resources. We have very little coverage up there. We have very little U.S. or Canadian presence, and this is a huge opportunity. If we can get our icebreaker shortage sorted out, this is a big opportunity for us to reestablish, especially in our hemisphere, to reestablish U.S. dominance in what should be a huge part of our backyard.
Not the Monroe Doctrine, but what the New York Post called the Donroe Doctrine, coming at you. And Alex Gray, American Global Strategy, is part of it. Thank you, Alex, for joining me.